Week 1, Day 1. The monthly Board of Directors meeting for the Serenity Creek Homeowners Association was held. As always, in the soulless, beige-walled community clubhouse, the air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and simmering resentment, clung to Jake Riley like a damp shroud. He sat in the third row of uncomfortable plastic chairs, a silent observer, his hands resting on his knees. He was a retired structural engineer, a man who had spent 40 years ensuring that bridges didn't collapse and skyscrapers didn't sway. He understood rules. He believed in them. Rules, like physics, were supposed to be impartial, logical, and uniformly applied. Here, in this room, they were a weapon. At the front, behind a folding table draped with a forest green cloth bearing the HOA's embossed logo, sat the board, a pitcher of ice water beaded with condensation beside a stack of glossy agendas. Presiding over it all was Carol Miller, the board president. Carol was a real estate agent with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, a smile that never reached her eyes, and a voice that could curdle milk with its cloying sweetness. "And finally," Carol said, her eyes scanning the room before landing squarely on Jake, "under new business, we have the ongoing matter of community standards compliance at 1428 Willow Trace Lane." A murmur rippled through the 24 homeowners in attendance. Jake felt a flush of heat creep up his neck. This was a performance, and he was the unwilling star. He hadn't been on the agenda. "As you all know," Carol continued, her tone a masterclass in practiced concern, "our covenants, conditions, and restrictions exist to protect the aesthetic harmony and, therefore, the property values of our beautiful community. They are not suggestions." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Unfortunately, Mr. Riley has shown an uncooperative attitude regarding a minor landscaping issue." Jake remained perfectly still, his expression neutral. He knew better than to engage. The minor landscaping issue was a row of 6 Leland cypress trees he had planted along his back property line. They were barely 5 feet tall. "This isn't about being punitive," Carol said, leaning into the microphone. Her voice was now a soothing balm of condescension. "It's about being a good neighbor. It's about understanding that our individual desires sometimes need to be secondary to the collective good. We've sent a courtesy notice, which was ignored. We simply ask for cooperation. Jake, that's all." She used his first name, a calculated move to frame him as a petulant child, being gently admonished by a patient adult. The eyes of his neighbors were on him, some sympathetic, most just glad it wasn't them. He saw Mrs. Gable from down the street avert her gaze, her hand tightening on her husband's arm. They were good people. They just didn't want to get involved. Jake met Carol's gaze. He did not scowl or protest. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, the kind an engineer gives when acknowledging a faulty data point that will need to be addressed later. With precision and overwhelming evidence. The public humiliation was a strategic move on her part, designed to isolate him, to make him feel the social pressure to comply. He knew this wasn't about trees. This was about something else entirely. And as he walked out of the clubhouse, into the humid evening air, the weight of the battle to come settled in his stomach. It wasn't the cold dread of fear. It was the familiar, heavy certainty of a complex engineering problem, one with high stakes and a dangerously unstable core. Week 1. Jake and his wife, Sarah, had bought their home in Serenity Creek 3 years ago for one reason. The backyard, Lot 1428, was one of only a handful in the development that backed directly onto the designated nature preserve, a 50-acre stretch of woods and wetlands that was, according to the glossy sales brochure, protected in perpetuity. For Jake, It was a quiet space to read. For Sarah, it was a sanctuary. Sarah had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder 5 years prior, a condition that caused chronic pain and fatigue, and was cruelly aggravated by stress. Her doctors had been unequivocal. A low-stress environment was not a luxury. It was a medical necessity. Their previous home, a condo downtown, had been a cacophony of sirens and construction. Serenity Creek, with its manicured lawns and quiet cul-de-sacs, was supposed to be their peaceful final chapter. Their home was their fortress against the world's chaos. "I still don't understand," Sarah said that evening, her voice thin. She was curled on the sofa, a heating pad draped over her lap. The violation notice from the meeting clutched in her hand. The stress of the public shaming had already triggered a flare-up. Jake could see the faint tremor in her fingers. "They're just trees." "Jake, why does she care so much?" Jake sat beside her, taking the notice. "It's not about the trees, honey. It's about control." He was a man of documents and data. Before they closed on the house, he had read every single page of the 2 and 18-page CC&Rs, the bylaws, and the community rules. He'd highlighted clauses, made notes in the margins, and created a cross-referenced index. He believed in knowing the rules of the game before you played. He flipped through their closing binder to the section he'd tabbed Architectural Control. Sarah had been the one to notice the clause in question. "Here it is," he said, pointing to the text. Sarah leaned in, reading aloud. Forger 8.4.2. Scenic views. No structure, fence, wall, or landscaping shall be erected, placed, or permitted to remain on any lot which may unreasonably obstruct scenic views from any common area. She looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "This scenic view rule seems a little vague. Doesn't it? Unreasonably obstruct? Who decides what's unreasonable?" "Exactly," Jake said, a grin set to his jaw. "The Architectural Control Committee decides. And guess who chairs the committee?" "Carol." "Carol," he confirmed. "It's a subjective clause, and a subjective rule is a tyrant's best friend." The trees in question stood neatly along the black aluminum fence that marked the boundary of their private lot. Beyond the fence was the common area, the so-called nature preserve. The view they allegedly obstructed was of a dense, swampy thicket of underbrush and poison ivy. It was hardly the Grand Canyon. No one ever went back there. There wasn't even a trail. The courtesy notice had arrived a week before the meeting. A flimsy piece of paper left flapping under their doormat. It was polite, almost friendly, citing Barber 8.4.2 and suggesting the trees might mature into a potential obstruction. Jake, seeing it for the procedural nonsense it was, had filed it away and done nothing. Ignoring it, he now realized, was the first move Carol had been waiting for him to make. It allowed her to escalate, to paint him as uncooperative in a public forum. The next day, Jake walked the property line. The surveyor pins were still visible at the corners of his lot. 2 iron rods marking the legal boundary between his domain and that of the HOA. He was meticulous about such things. His trees were a good 2 feet inside his property line. The common area beyond was unkempt, a wild tangle that was the HOA's responsibility to maintain, though they rarely did. He took a series of photographs, documenting the exact location of the trees relative to the property pins and the dense, unscenic wall of foliage behind them. Data, he thought. The first step to solving any problem is gathering accurate data. He watched Sarah through the kitchen window as she tended to her small garden of herbs. Her movements were slow, careful. The stress was already taking its toll. This fight wasn't just about his principles anymore. It was about her health, It was about defending the very sanctuary they had built to protect her. The thought hardened his resolve. Carol Miller had mistaken his quiet, methodical nature for weakness. She was about to learn the difference between a flimsy rulebook and the unyielding laws of physics. Week 2. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. The mail carrier, a friendly woman named Diane, wore a look of genuine pity as she handed Jake the clipboard to sign. The green, certified mail slip, with its ominous tracking numbers and required signature, was the HOA's version of a summons. It was a formal escalation, a clear signal that the time for polite notices was over. Sarah saw it from the living room window, and her face paled. "Oh, Jake, what is it?" "It's just the next step in the process, honey," he said, trying to keep his voice steady for her sake. Inside, a cold anger was solidifying. "Don't you worry about it." He opened the envelope with a letter opener, a precise, clean slice. The paper inside was thick, expensive letterhead embossed with the Serenity Creek logo. The tone was no longer friendly. Formal notice of violation. Date October 12, 2023. To Jacob and Sarah Riley. 1428. Willow Trace, Lane from Serenity Creek. HOA Board of Directors, via certified mail. Return receipt requested. RE violation of governing documents. CC&R. Paragraph 8.4.2. Scenic views. This letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the Serenity Creek covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs. An inspection conducted on October 11, 2023, confirmed that landscaping 6 Leland cypress trees installed on your lot, 1428, unreasonably obstructs the scenic view from the adjacent common area, specifically the nature preserve. This is in direct violation of Paragraph 8.4.2. A courtesy notice regarding this matter was sent on October 2, 2023, to which no response was received. Cure required. You are hereby required to remove the non-compliant landscaping in its entirety. Deadline for compliance. The violation must be cured within 14 days of the date of this notice, by October 26, 2023. Failure to comply. Failure to cure the violation by the specified deadline will result in the levying of fines, as outlined in the association's fine policy, and you will be summoned to appear at a hearing before the Architectural Control Committee ACC. The letter was signed by the entire board, but Carol's signature was at the top, a flamboyant, self-important scrawl. It was a declaration of war written in the bloodless language of bureaucracy. "This is insane," Sarah whispered, reading over his shoulder. "They're threatening to fine us over trees that are barely taller than I am for blocking a view of a swamp." "It's not about the view, Sarah," Jake said, his voice low and firm. "It's about compliance. They want to see if we'll bend." He placed the letter on the granite countertop, alongside the courtesy notice and his own photographs of the property line. He was building a file. Every piece of correspondence, every date, every interaction was a data point. He called the number for the HOA's management company, a faceless entity called Community Partners, Inc., located in a sterile office park 30 miles away, after navigating an automated phone tree designed to crush the human spirit. He finally reached a portfolio manager named Brenda. "Yes, Mr. Riley," Brenda said, her voice dripping with the weary indifference of someone who deals with angry homeowners all day. "I have your file right here. You received the notice of violation regarding the trees." "I did," Jake said calmly. "I'd like to understand the basis for this violation. The view being obstructed is of an inaccessible, overgrown thicket, No one can even access the spot from which the view is supposedly being taken. Brenda sighed, a sound of pure static and frustration. Sir, the board has the sole authority to interpret the CC&Rs. Their determination is that the trees are an obstruction. The notice is valid. You have 14 days to comply. And if I don't? Then, as the letter states, fines will begin, and a hearing will be scheduled. Is there anything else I can help you with today? The finality in her tone was absolute. She was a gatekeeper, paid to enforce the board's decisions, not to question them. Jake hung up the phone. The path forward was clear, a frustrating, time-consuming, and utterly predictable sequence of procedural battles. They had him in a box. He could capitulate and cut down the trees, proving that he would yield to Carol's arbitrary authority. Or he could fight, triggering a process designed to wear him down with fines, hearings, and the constant stress of being in conflict with his own community. He looked at Sarah, who was now massaging her temples, a sure sign of a stress-induced migraine. The cost of this fight was not just financial. It was being measured in his wife's health. I'm going to fight this. Sarah, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. They're counting on us giving up. We're not going to give up. He spent the rest of the afternoon drafting a formal response, a dispassionate, engineering-style rebuttal to the violation notice. He cited the exact height of the trees, the GPS coordinates of his property pins, and the lack of any designated viewpoint or trail in the common area. He included his dated photographs as exhibits. He would build a case so logical, so rooted in fact, that no reasonable person could rule against him. He sent the letter via certified mail, creating his own paper trail. He knew, of course, that he wasn't dealing with reasonable people. He was dealing with Carol. Week 4. The notice of hearing arrived. As expected, 2 days after the compliance deadline passed, it summoned Jake to appear before the Architectural Control Committee to plead his case. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday evening, back in the same beige clubhouse. Jake prepared for it like he would for a structural integrity review. He organized his documents into a binder with tabbed sections correspondence, photographic evidence, CC&R analysis, and plat and survey. He had copies of his home's original survey map, clearly showing his property lines. He had a printed-out timeline of events. He was armed with logic and facts. Sarah was too unwell to attend. The mounting stress had confined her to bed for the past 2 days. Just be calm, Jake. She had urged him. Don't let them see they're getting to you. The hearing was a kangaroo court. The ACC consisted of 3 members, Carol, naturally. As the chair, Arthur Gable, an elderly, mild-mannered man who had lived in Serenity Creek since it was built, and a newer resident named Brenda, who seemed to take all her cues from Carol. Jake was given 10 minutes to present his case. He stood at the small lectern and spoke calmly and methodically. He didn't raise his voice or betray any emotion. He was an engineer presenting data. Good evening, he began. My name is Jake Riley, 1428, Willow Trace Lane. I am here to appeal the notice of violation dated October 12th. He walked them through his evidence. He showed them the large, glossy prints of his photographs, pointing out the surveyor's pins and the dense wall of weeds that constituted the scenic view. He presented his survey map, highlighting that the trees were well within his property. As you can see, he concluded, the trees are located entirely on my private lot. Furthermore, the area of the supposed scenic view in the common area is not only unattractive, it is physically inaccessible. There is no path, no trail, and no designated viewing area. Therefore, the claim that these small trees unreasonably obstruct a scenic view is, by any objective measure, baseless. He sat down, confident that the sheer weight of his logic was irrefutable. Carol smiled her serene, infuriating smile. "Thank you for your presentation. Jake, the committee appreciates you taking the time to share your perspective." She didn't look at his evidence. Her mind was already made up. "Arthur, do you have any questions?" Arthur Gable shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He glanced at Jake's photos, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Well, the boy does have a point. Carol, there's not much of a view back there to begin with. It's mostly just weeds." Carol's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. The CC&Rs exist to protect not just current views, Arthur, but potential views. The long-term health of our community's aesthetic depends on foresight. The governing documents grant the board the authority to make these interpretations for the good of the whole. Brenda nodded eagerly. "I agree with Carol. If we let one person bend the rules, everyone will want to. It's a slippery slope." Carol turned her gaze back to Jake. "The committee has reviewed the matter. While we appreciate your position, the board's interpretation of FAR 8.4.2 stands. The violation is upheld." It was that simple. His facts, his logic, his evidence, none of it mattered. "Therefore," Carol continued, her voice taking on a formal, almost gleeful tone, "pursuant to the association's duly adopted fine policy, a fine of $100 is hereby levied. Furthermore, a continuing fine of $25 per day will be assessed for each day the violation remains uncured. You will receive a formal notice of the committee's decision in the mail. This hearing is adjourned." She banged a small, ridiculous gavel on the table. Arthur Gable wouldn't meet Jake's eyes. Jake packed his binder slowly, his movements deliberate. He had lost, just as he knew he would. The process wasn't about justice. It was a tool of attrition. The fines were designed to bleed him out, financially and emotionally. He walked out of the clubhouse into the chilly night, the condescending lecture on community harmony still ringing in his ears. The first real shot had been fired, and it had hit its mark. The daily fines were now ticking away like a time bomb. Weeks 4-5. The fines began to accumulate with infuriating regularity. Every day, Jake's account on the Community Partners website ticked up by another $25, $125, $150, $175. It was a constant, draining reminder of his powerlessness. The stress was having a visible effect on Sarah. She was paler, more withdrawn. The home that was meant to be her sanctuary was now the source of her deepest anxiety. Jake knew he was fighting a battle on two fronts, one against the HOA, and one against the clock of his wife's deteriorating health. He realized he couldn't win this fight with logic alone. He was an engineer, not a detective. He needed someone who knew how to navigate the labyrinth of property law and public records. Someone who could find the real reason behind Carol's obsession with his trees. He found him through an old colleague, Mark Callahan, a retired county surveyor. Mark was a cantankerous man in his late 60s with a bloodhound's nose for procedural shortcuts and bureaucratic malfeasance. He had spent 40 years untangling the messes left by developers, lawyers, and HOAs. He was cynical, knowledgeable, and gloriously methodical. They met at a diner, the air thick with the smell of bacon and coffee. Jake laid out his binder of evidence on the table. Mark thumbed through it, his expression a mixture of boredom and professional interest. Standard playbook. Mark grunted after a few minutes, sipping his coffee. Vague clause. Selective enforcement. Sham hearing. They do this to soften you up. The real leverage comes later. With the lien. "The lien?" Jake asked. "Yeah," Mark said. looking at him over the rim of his cup. "When the fines get big enough, they'll put a lien on your house. You won't be able to sell or refinance until it's paid. If it gets really big, they can foreclose. They can take your home for a few $1,000s in unpaid fines and legal fees. That's the real threat." The word foreclose hung in the air, cold and heavy. This was no longer just a stressful annoyance. It was an existential threat to their home. "I need to know why," Jake said. "This isn't about trees. There has to be another reason." Mark nodded slowly. "There always is. Give me a retainer, and I'll start digging. First thing I'll look at is the master deed and the original plat maps. The HOA gave you a welcome packet with a community map, but it's not the official, legally binding plat map filed with the county. There's often a difference." He tapped a thick finger on the table for emphasis. Developers love to make the sales maps look prettier than the legal reality. Jake wrote him a check, for the first time in weeks. He felt a sliver of hope. He was no longer fighting alone. A few days later, the first anonymous clue arrived. It was an email from a Proton Mail address, a string of random numbers and letters. The subject line was simply Frogger 8.4.2. There was no text in the body of the email. Only a single attachment, a PDF file. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he downloaded it. It was a scanned copy of official meeting minutes from a Serenity Creek HOA board meeting, held 6 months prior. The document was heavily redacted. Thick, black bars obscured names, figures, and entire paragraphs. He could only make out fragments. Proposal from Pine Valley Development. Adjacent parcel. Future construction. Concerns raised about redacted impacting sightlines. Board agrees in principle to cooperate on clearing, in accordance with Frogger 8.4.2. It was a puzzle with most of the pieces missing, but the shape of it was unmistakable. A developer, an adjacent piece of land, and a direct reference to the exact CC&R clause being used against him. Someone was using the scenic view rule to clear a path for a new development project. The mystery of what's under the black ink gnawed at him. Who was Pine Valley Development? What were they building, and what was their connection to Carol? He forwarded the email to Mark, who called him back an hour later. Well. Mark's gravelly voice crackled over the phone. "Now we're getting somewhere. Pine Valley Development is a big player. They've been buying up land all over the county for luxury townhome projects. And guess who the listing agent is for their last 3 developments?" Jake already knew the answer. Carol Miller. "Bingo," Mark said. "This isn't just about control. Jake, this is about money. A lot of it. I'm heading down to the county recorder's office tomorrow morning. I have a feeling the official plat map is going to tell us a very interesting story." The daily fines on the HOA portal had now surpassed $500. The first formal invoice had arrived in the mail, printed on stark white paper, detailing the charges with cold, bureaucratic precision. But now, the fight felt different. It was no longer a defensive battle. With Mark's help and a mysterious ally feeding him clues, Jake was finally going on the attack. Week 5. The County Hall of Records was an imposing granite building that smelled of old paper, floor wax, and the slow march of time. Mark Callahan moved through its halls with the easy familiarity of a man returning to his natural habitat. He led Jake past the public terminals and into a back room filled with oversized, leather-bound plat books and whirring microfilm readers. "Digital is fine for a quick search," Mark explained, heaving a massive book onto a viewing table. "But for the real dirt, you need the original filings. The paper doesn't lie." For 2 hours, they pored over deeds, surveys, and maps, tracing the history of the land that became Serenity Creek. Finally, Mark unrolled a huge, crackling sheet of paper the official, legally binding master plat map for the Serenity Creek planned community, filed with the county in 1998. "Here we are," Mark said, his finger tracing the lines of the development. He pointed to Jake's lot, number 1428, "and here's your property line." Jake leaned in. The map was a web of precise, black and white lines, numbers, and notations. It was a language he understood. His lot was clearly delineated, backing onto the area marked Common Area A, Nature Preserve. But then he saw it, running along the entire back edge of the common area. Immediately behind Jake's property line was a distinct, shaded corridor marked with a series of technical symbols. "What's that?" Jake asked, pointing to the shaded area. Mark grinned. "A rare and triumphant sight. That, my friend, is the ball game." He tapped the legend at the bottom of the map. "It's a 10-foot wide dedicated public utility easement, gas line, sewer main, fiber optic cable. It's a utility corridor, legally accessible only to the county and utility companies for maintenance. It's not a park. It's not a scenic vista. It's an infrastructure corridor that the developer had to grant to the county in exchange for building permits." The pieces clicked into place with the force of a revelation. The scenic view Carroll was so fanatically protecting, the view his trees were supposedly obstructing, didn't exist. The land directly behind his fence was not a pristine nature preserve for homeowners to gaze upon. It was an inaccessible, legally restricted utility right-of-way. His hedges didn't obstruct anything of value because there was nothing of value to obstruct. "She can't know about this," Jake breathed. "If she knew, she wouldn't have a case." "Oh, I think she knows," Mark countered, pulling another document from his briefcase. It was a copy of the HOA's original master deed. The master deed, which formed the HOA, makes explicit reference to all easements recorded on the official plat map. As president of the board, she has a fiduciary duty to be aware of these documents. This isn't ignorance, Jake. This is deliberate. It was more than a smoking gun. It was a signed confession. Carroll wasn't just misinterpreting a vague rule. She was knowingly enforcing a fiction. She was using the cover of a non-existent scenic view to force him to clear landscaping from his private property, all for the benefit of her developer partners, who wanted an unobstructed sightline for the luxury townhomes they planned to build on the adjacent parcel. They made high-resolution copies of the plat map and the relevant pages of the master deed, walking out of the Hall of Records into the bright afternoon sun. Jake felt a surge of adrenaline. He finally had it, the hard, irrefutable evidence that could blow Carroll's entire case apart. The fight was no longer his word against hers. It was his word against an official, legally binding county document, and in a contest with a plat map. The plat map always wins. Week 6. Armed with the official plat map, Jake felt invincible. He drafted a new letter, this one addressed to the board of directors via the management company. He was polite, professional, and surgically precise. He attached a copy of the plat map with the utility easement highlighted, a copy of the master deed referencing the easement, and a brief, declarative statement. As the attached, legally binding documents clearly show, the area immediately behind my property is a dedicated utility easement, not a scenic preserve. Therefore, the basis for the violation of FROR 8.4.2 is factually incorrect. I request an immediate reversal of the violation notice and a full cancellation of all associated fines. He sent it, once again, via certified mail, and also emailed a digital copy to Brenda at Community Partners Inc. for good measure. He expected a swift, if grudging, capitulation. The response came 2 days later in the form of an email from Brenda. It was a masterwork of bureaucratic deflection. Mr. Riley. Thank you for your correspondence. The board has received and reviewed the documents you provided. However, as stated previously, per bylaw, WAR 3.1, the Board of Directors retains the sole and exclusive authority to interpret the covenants. The committee's decision regarding the obstruction of the scenic view from the common area is final. Your account remains in arrears. Sincerely, Brenda Miller, Community Partners, Inc. Jake stared at the email in disbelief. It was a breathtaking display of institutional arrogance. They weren't even denying the existence of the easement. They were simply stating that their power to interpret the rules superseded the legal reality of a county-recorded plat map. They were claiming the right to declare that black was white and that a sewer line was a scenic vista. His phone rang. It was Mark. They doubled down, didn't they? How did you know? Jake asked, the frustration evident in his voice. Because it's not about being right anymore, Mark said. It's about power. They know they're wrong, but they're betting you don't have the money or the will to fight them in court. Admitting their mistake now would open them up to a lawsuit. So, they're going to crush you with procedure. Mark's prediction came true the very next day. Another certified letter arrived. This one was thicker, printed on even more intimidating letterhead. Notice of intent to record a claim of lien. It stated that his delinquent account, now totaling over $1,500 in fines and administrative fees, constituted a debt against his property. If the full amount was not paid within 30 days, the association's attorneys would file a lien against his home's title. The official, legal threat to his home was no longer a distant possibility. It was here, in black and white. Sarah broke down in tears when she saw it. They're going to take our house. Jake, she sobbed, the paper trembling in her hands. All because of some stupid trees. It's not worth it. Let's just pay them. Let's just cut them down. No, Jake said, his voice a low growl of defiance. He pulled her into an embrace, feeling the fragility of her frame. That's what they want. They want us to break. If we give in now, they win. I'm not letting them do this to you. To us. In the same envelope was a glossy, tri-fold brochure printed in the HOA's signature forest green. It was the official announcement for the annual homeowners meeting, scheduled for the following Tuesday, just 1 week away. There would be an open forum, a public session where any homeowner in good standing could address the community. Each speaker was allotted 5 minutes. Jake looked from the lien notice to the meeting announcement. A plan began to form in his mind, a strategy as precise and calculated as a bridge design. Carol wanted to fight this battle behind the closed doors of committee meetings and through intimidating legal notices. She felt safe there, wrapped in the authority of her position. The annual meeting was different. It was a public forum. There would be witnesses. The entire community would be there. He looked at the fines, the lien notice, the plat map spread across his dining room table. He had all the evidence. He had the truth. What he needed now was the right stage. And Carol had just handed it to him. Week 7. The community clubhouse buzzed with the low-grade chatter of suburban obligation. At least 50 homeowners filled the plastic chairs, fanning themselves with their agendas. At the front of the room, Carol Miller stood at the podium, basking in the spotlight. A large digital countdown timer was projected on the screen behind her. Currently dark, it was used to keep the homeowner open forum section moving, a tool of efficiency that Jake was about to turn into a weapon of suspense. Jake sat in the 4th row, a simple manila folder on his lap. He had signed up for a 5-minute speaking slot the moment he arrived. He was number 3 on the list. Sarah was at home, too anxious to attend, but she had squeezed his hand before he left. Be the engineer. Jake, She'd whispered, calm, logical, overwhelming. Before the meeting began, Arthur Gable, the elderly board member, shuffled over to him. His face was etched with worry. "Jake, son," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I just want you to be careful up there. What you're doing, it takes guts. But be careful." He leaned closer. "My sister-in-law, Martha. She got a variance for her patio last year, a few inches over the setback line. Carol's interpretation of the rules was what got it approved. If you burn it all down, you'll hurt good people. Too. People who just followed the rules they were given." The weight of Arthur's words settled on Jake. This was the secondary moral twist. His victory couldn't be a scorched earth campaign. He couldn't become the very thing he was fighting, a force that harmed innocent neighbors through the rigid application of rules. His solution had to be surgical. He nodded at Arthur. A silent promise. Carol delivered her president's report. A polished litany of accomplishments, new petunias planted at the entrance, a successful community garage sale, a glowing financial report that conveniently omitted the line item for legal fees related to collections. She was confident, poised, in complete command. "Finally," she announced, "we will now move to the open forum. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. First up is Mrs. Gable to discuss the holiday decoration schedule." The timer appeared on the screen. Mrs. Gable spoke. Then a man complained about speeding cars. Then it was Jake's turn. "Next, we have Jake Riley," Carol announced, her smile unwavering but a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Jake walked to the podium, placed his folder on the surface, and looked out at his neighbors. He adjusted the microphone. The timer on the screen behind him began its silent, relentless countdown. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and steady, carrying through the room. "My name is Jake Riley, 1428 Willow Trace Lane. Most of you know me as the man with the uncooperative attitude about his landscaping." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the audience. Carol's smile froze. "I'm here tonight to talk about CC&R Section 8.4.2. He picked up a sheet of paper from his folder. It states, and I quote, "No structure or landscaping shall be erected, which may unreasonably obstruct scenic views from any common area." The board, led by Ms. Miller, has used this rule to fine me over $1,500 and has sent me a notice of intent to lien my home. He let that sink in. The murmuring in the room grew louder. "The board claims my trees block a scenic view. I'd like to show you what that scenic view actually is." He pulled a transparency from his folder and placed it on the overhead projector. A crisp, black and white image filled the screen. "This," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "is not a marketing map. This is the official, legally binding plat map of our community, on file at the County Hall of Records." He used a laser pointer to trace his property line. "Here is my lot, and here." The red dot settled on the shaded corridor behind his property is the scenic view in question. As you can see from the county's own legend, this is a 10-foot wide dedicated public utility easement. It contains a sewer main and a gas line. It is not a park. It is not a preserve. It is an infrastructure corridor. There is no scenic view to obstruct. The board's entire case is based on a legal fiction. The room erupted. Homeowners were on their feet, pointing at the screen, shouting questions. Carol was banging her gavel, her face ashen. "Order, Mr. Riley. Your point is made." "I'm not finished," Jake said, his voice cutting through the noise. The timer was his shield. He placed a second transparency on the projector. It was the redacted meeting minutes he had received anonymously. This is a copy of the board's minutes from April. It mentions a developer, Pine Valley Development, and the board's agreement to cooperate in clearing sightlines using Section 8.4.2. He looked directly at Carol. What, I wondered, was under those black bars? He placed his final transparency on the projector. It was the same page of minutes, but this time, there were no redactions. He'd received it that morning from his anonymous source. A final, perfectly timed payload. Thanks to a concerned member of our community who believes in transparency, I now have the unredacted version. The homeowners surged forward to read the screen. The key sentence was now horrifyingly clear. Board agrees in principle to cooperate on clearing sightlines for Pine Valley development in accordance with Veror 8.4.2. Board President Miller noted her 2% commission agreement with Pine Valley on the sale of the future townhomes, contingent on securing unobstructed views from the adjacent parcel, which she estimates will increase unit sale prices by $50,000 each. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Carol stood frozen, exposed. Jake lowered his voice, turning back to the homeowners. This was never about trees. It was about using our association's power to enrich the board president at our expense. He then looked toward Arthur Gable, whose face was a mask of dismay. But my goal is not to punish our neighbors, Jake said, addressing Arthur's fear directly. I know some of you have received variances based on the board's flexible interpretations. I am not here to harm good people who acted in good faith based on bad information. Therefore, I propose two things. First, an immediate, independent audit of all board decisions related to this development deal. Second, I propose we grandfather in any pre-existing variances, like Mrs. Gable's patio, that were approved under the board's previous, incorrect interpretation. We can correct the corruption without punishing the innocent. He had won. He had exposed the lie, revealed the motive, and offered a constructive, healing path forward. He was not just a victor, he was a leader. The timer flashed, 0:00. Jake's 5 minutes were up. He nodded to the audience. Thank you for your time. The silence in the room lasted for a full 3 seconds before it shattered into 100 angry questions. The homeowners, who had arrived expecting a mundane meeting about holiday decorations, were now an outraged mob. They surged toward the dais, their glossy agendas forgotten, shouting at Carol and the other board members. Is this true? Carol yelled the man who had complained about speeding. Were you using our HOA to get a commission? What about my violation notice for my basketball hoop? Another woman demanded. Was that for a developer? 2. The representative from Community Partners, Inc., a man in an ill-fitting suit, who had been silently observing from the side, rushed to the podium. This forum is now closed. The meeting is adjourned, he shouted into the microphone, but his voice was drowned out by the crescendo of fury. It was Arthur Gable who restored order. He slowly rose from his seat at the board's table, his hands trembling slightly, and walked to the microphone. He was an old man, but his voice, when he spoke, was filled with a newfound, steely resolve. No, Arthur said, his voice cracking but clear. This meeting is not adjourned. He turned to face the crowd, his neighbors of 20 years. I have served on this board for a decade. I have trusted, and I have been complicit in my silence. For that, I am deeply sorry. He then turned to his fellow board members. As a director, I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in our president, Carol Miller. Brenda, the third board member, looked from Carol's horrified face to the angry crowd and back to Arthur's determined expression. The calculus was simple. She stammered, I second the motion. The management company representative sputtered. You can't do this. It's not on the agenda. It violates procedure. "We are making it the agenda," Arthur retorted, empowered by the roaring approval of the homeowners. "All those in favor of removing Carol Miller as president, say aye." A deafening AYE shook the room. All opposed. Silence. Even Carol, defeated and exposed, said nothing. "The motion carries," Arthur declared. "Carol Miller is hereby removed as president and from the board of directors, effective immediately." Carol grabbed her purse and, without a word, pushed her way through the jeering crowd and fled the clubhouse. The homeowners erupted in applause, not just for Carol's downfall, but for the reclamation of their community. People surrounded Jake, shaking his hand, patting him on the back. They saw him not as a troublemaker, but as the man who had the courage to fight for them all. In the weeks that followed, the old Serenity Creek HOA was dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. Arthur Gable, acting as interim president, immediately spearheaded the changes Jake had proposed. An independent forensic auditor was hired. The audit confirmed everything Jake had revealed and more, uncovering a pattern of self-dealing and conflicts of interest tied to Carol's real estate business. Her contract with Pine Valley Development was voided, and the developer, facing a public relations nightmare and potential legal action, permanently shelved their plans for the townhomes. The board officially rescinded Jake's violation notice and expunged all fines and fees from his account. The lien was never filed. The management contract with Community Partners, Inc. was terminated by a unanimous vote at an emergency session, and a new, more transparent company was hired. At the next monthly meeting, with a full slate of new board members elected on a platform of transparency, the floor was given to Jake. His 5-minute victory lap was expected to be a celebration of his personal triumph. But Jake had one final surprise. He walked to the podium, not with a folder of evidence, but with a single sheet of paper. "Last month," he began, "we learned that our governing documents can be used as weapons when they are intentionally misinterpreted in secret. Our greatest vulnerability wasn't a vague rule. It was a lack of shared knowledge. We can't all be expected to spend hours at the Hall of Records." He held up the paper. "That's why I am not here to celebrate a victory, but to propose a solution. I have drafted a new transparency bylaw. It's very simple. It would require the HOA to distribute a complete, unredacted copy of the official county plat map, clearly marking all easements and common areas, to every single homeowner annually, along with the budget. It also requires that any board member with a potential financial conflict of interest must disclose it publicly and recuse themselves from the relevant vote." He looked around the room, at the faces of his neighbors, no longer strangers in a tense meeting, but partners in a community. "Knowledge is not just power," he said. "It is protection. This bylaw will ensure that what happened to my family can never happen to anyone else in this community again." The motion was seconded instantly, and it passed with a unanimous, enthusiastic vote. Walking home that evening, Jake felt a profound sense of peace. The Leland cypress trees stood tall and green along his fence line. Through the kitchen window, he could see Sarah, humming to herself as she prepared dinner, the lines of stress gone from her face. Their sanctuary was safe again. He had faced the bureaucracy and won, not by breaking the rules, but by using the truth to enforce them. He had not only defended his home, he had helped restore his community, building something stronger and more transparent from the wreckage of corruption. His victory was not an end, but a new, more secure beginning for them all.